Salutations, everyone. Welcome back to Total War Pharaoh Dynasties. I'm Lord Torrent, and today we've got a guide for you on Troy, faction of Priam, Hector, and of course, one cannot neglect Paris, who I guess they decided to make look a little like Orlando Bloom. Um, we're going to go over a lot of stuff in this video. I'm going to try and timestamp it below so you can kind of skip to what you're looking for. If you don't see what you're looking for in this video, make sure to check out the larger playlists of all the Total War Pharaoh guides I have. You might find it on there. I'll put it below in the description. And let's get started. So the first thing we're going to start with is the strengths and weaknesses of the Trojan faction. So we're going to go over all these and then I'll explain them more in depth when we get to the individual section. So Troy is fundamentally a diplomatic and range faction. So if that does not sound fun for you, Troy is not the faction for you. In fact, I find it to be a very difficult faction to play out of all the major ones. So the first thing is Troy has the Sons of Troy unit ability. Now, this requires a little explaining here because it's not entirely straightforward. Basically, if you have units that fight around other units that have Sons of Troy, they fight better. At the start, it's mainly range units, but later on, you can upgrade that to be more of your general units. So just be aware of that. It's useful. It's kind of in some ways needed for Troy to fight on par with other factions. I'll get into that when we go over their more specialized units, but you're gonna want to use it. The other things to note here is that it has what's called the Foreign Affairs Office, which increases diplomatic relations with other factions. Remember how I said this was slightly more diplomatic than most factions? It also gives you gold income, and interestingly enough, reduces your influence in the province. The lower your influence gets, the more gold and other units you will get from your lands. So compare it to the Agamemnon Mycenae faction, which is the other major Aegean faction. It's kind of the opposite, where Agamemnon wants high influence, Troy wants lower influence, enough that they don't cause trouble, but enough that they get their bonuses from it. The Trojan monument can be built once in your faction, gives Sons of Troy to newly recruited units in the area, gets you happiness and victory points. Honestly, you'd probably be very ahistorical if you don't stick it in Troy. And that's fair, because Troy is going to be the center of your power for a long, long time. Which makes sense for a faction literally named after a city. Now, in terms of units here, and I'll try to talk about them more later, Troy is a ranged faction. Think MMSA of Egypt. They both love archers. To be fair, Troy also has some decent slingers, but really it's the archers. They can get their archers that can outrange basically every other faction, and they rely extremely heavily on archers. That, of course, has some benefits and negatives. Obviously, if you're fighting a lot of enemies with shields, Troy struggles immensely, but if you're fighting a lot of factions, and currently the AI factions love to build two-handed warriors, you will absolutely decimate them. The downside is you have to have a front line that holds, and that's kind of where they give you this Guards of Troy unit. I personally didn't find these ones good enough to hold the line. They're also one of your elite units, so they're very expensive. There are cheaper native units like two-hand clubmen and stuff, which do a better job of fighting and actually getting kills, while your archers absolutely obliterate everything. That's going to be a reoccurring thing, range and archer distance. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Now, in terms of their commands, the command is kind of interesting, and I'm going to just go over here because this summary is better. For each different influence above 20% in any one of your provinces, you get one foreign presence. If you use the button here, Troy's commands, you get one high tier unit for each point of foreign presence. If not used, you get 50 gold for each foreign presence. Now, this is important for Troy because there's no really easy access to gold for Troy unless you go conquering southward. However, this allows you to support some elite units without having to have a gold mine. or trade for it as much. Also, and this is very important, factions at war with you get a penalty to morale and charge bonus for each foreign presence. This means you actually want as much foreign presence in your land as you can get. It only counts once per type of influence, so you've got to work your way around to getting those influences. But it can be very powerful. If you conquer all of the Aegean and a good portion of Anatolia, Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, and then you go invade somewhere like Greece, the amount of foreign presence you might have in your land means a lot of the low, cheap militia units will rout. It's what happened to me in one of my games. Basically, they ran away after the first volley of arrows. Of course, their elite units still fought, but and that's kind of it. It kind of explains a little bit more here. You can read it if you like, but that's how you're going to want to use it. Get foreign presence up to 20% in at least one of the provinces. The easiest way to do it is conquer a province with that influence, and then just don't convert it completely. Now, in terms of the court, you start as the supreme ruler. You're the head of the Aegean factions. Now, this has some bonuses and it has some negatives. First off, everyone's gunning for you. On the other hand, you're starting as the ruling supreme ruler. So this means you get all those advantages. However, early game, they're very weak. Your biggest threat is probably going to come from Mycenae, which makes sense, being the other major faction. But I've seen some minor ones pop up. So this means you actually have to maintain a good amount of legitimacy or risk a civil war rather quickly. Mycenae is particularly aggressive and good at conquering its neighbors, whereas Troy is not as good, meaning it can be a bit of a struggle early game, but once you get your legitimacy rolling in from conquering lands and owning Aegean areas, by and large, you're uncatchable. Compared to something like Hatti, you have a harder time maintaining your power before the first civil war, but as the game goes on, you get better at it than Hatti, in my opinion. Now, the other thing here, and this is kind of interesting for Priam, when you use intrigue, the gossip action in the court, you reveal all the plots related to the court position. And then if you discourage or encourage them, you can get gold. The biggest problem with this ability, and I really hope they rework it, is because you're the supreme ruler and you actually will have the ability to appoint people to 2 slots. Basically, all the plots in the court are coming to you, meaning you can't really encourage or discourage them. This is a court ability that actually would be better off somewhere in the hands of like Agamemnon or another minor faction, or at least a faction that doesn't start a supreme ruler. So it's kind of interesting. Now, other things to note here, we'll just go over these quickly. You have the Shrines of Apollo. In fact, you're worshiping Apollo, which is the head deity for the Aegean ancient tradition type stuff. Basically, this boosts the missile damage of your range units. And if you pray there, you get increased line of sight and reload time. You're going to want to worship before a lot of battles, which is fine because you're probably going to have a temple, Shrine of Apollo in Troy's region itself. And since Troy is by and large where a lot of your attacks and fights are going to take place early game, fighting various sea people and the islanders, this is very useful for you. Don't forget the trading post exists, though, and it makes an actual note here, probably because you start with one, but the trading post will help you manage the fact that you don't have access to bronze or gold by reducing your upkeep. So it does deserve special mention. This is just the standard Aegean stuff. You can do a hecatomb to any Aegean god and get their prayer effect. So if you're not around a Shrine of Apollo, you can still pray to them and get a huge boost for your range units. I personally don't use them a lot. Just be aware you have rain and fog more than sweltering heat, so you might have trouble when fighting in deserts. So don't invade Egypt until you're ready for it, basically. In terms of your titles, this is kind of interesting. For some reason, your titles allow you to raid enemy territories better, but by and large, the focus is increasing the combat capabilities of ranged units, as well as for alliances and production buildings. You get bonuses and they're cheaper. All great stuff. Now, in terms of the dynasty, Priam starts with arguably one of the better dynasties in the game. Priam is very old, so he's likely to die, but he has Hector and he has Paris as well as daughters. So you're probably going to want to marry Hector and Paris off. In fact, in one of my games, I married him to Helen in Agamemnon's faction because she's not actually married to Menelaus, which was kind of interesting. Thus avoiding the entire Iliad. This is just kind of how it says build the legitimacy. It's pretty useless to you. You have 3 sacred Aegean lands. You'll get a couple more. Don't worry about it all. You're probably better off actually throwing down like a monument in one of your territories for that 8 legitimacy bonus or so, and then worry about it later. Now, in terms of your ancient legacy, it recommends you go for the ancient legacy of Perseus. I am not a big fan of the Perseus legacy. It goes well for Troy, and it's, of course, designed for Troy. It encourages you to make alliances and then recruit your allies' units as well as holding, like, Olympic Games. It's okay compared to the other tradition, the legacy of... oh my gosh, can you believe I've forgotten what it is? There we are, Atreus. Atreus is much more military focused, which is obviously designed for Mycenae. However, Troy does not do that bad with it. Just assume you're not going to ally to all your neighbors and instead conquer them, and you'll get the bonuses from them. The nice thing is it can give you a 50 legitimacy bonus in a civil war, which Perseus can't really do. However, for the sake of this guide, we're going to look at Perseus the hero. And by the way, the reason I can show you guys this on turn 1 is I've enabled it in campaign customization for those who are confused. So you start with the Aegean bond, and as you get higher levels of bond, it levels up. At the highest level here, you get 4 diplomatic relations with all factions, special recruitment, as in stuff that's not from your buildings, but instead on like the 2nd or 3rd tab of your military recruitment, cheaper. Recruitment size +7, meaning you can recruit armies of powerful units basically anywhere in the world, and they're not as expensive. Global recruitment rank +4, so you'll recruit special units anywhere, but if you recruit globally, as in you're probably recruiting Trojan archers, there'll be a higher rank. 4 is important because it triggers a lot of the bonuses you get from the royal decrees, as well as another ability, which you get at lower levels as well. If you host a game, think Olympic Games here, including the torch, if you host a game with a faction that you are at war with, you will then go to peace with them. In return, the participants declare peace between each other and yourself while gifting you resources. However, you do have to offer up ancillaries. So if I was to do this right now, we'd get 250 stone. Let's see if I can change. Sometimes you can actually change what you get. Oh, I guess not here. In this case, we're just getting stone. It's kind of cool. As you ally people, you can recruit these and you can go, okay, I want to recruit to that. Go here. You can get your special recruitment stuff as well. It's a very useful little ability. However, it relies on diplomacy and you not killing everybody around you. Again, Troy's focused on diplomacy. Okay, so that is basically it for the strengths and weaknesses, and as well as a bit on the legacies. By all means, go with the Atreus legacy if you want to conquer stuff. Let's look at royal decrees. It's basically going to be the same as the Agamemnon Mycenae faction, but compared to Mycenae, Troy gets, I think, a better bonuses out of it, which is kind of a little weird to talk about, but it is the case. So first off, if you started as Mycenae, you have legitimacy for battles. You do not have that as Troy. It's in fact one of the first texts you're probably going to want to research your way to, mainly so that you can keep up with the insane legitimacy game of Mycenae. However, you start with martial nobility. When you recruit a general, they're at a higher rank. It's nice, I guess. It's actually kind of handy having higher rank generals, so you can get the better recruitment, movement range, cheaper upkeep cost early on. And if you want, you could go straight to getting an ambition choice if you want to. However, there are some things to focus on. Normally, the first deck I recommend is getting Fisherman's Tithe plus 15 food for ports. As Troy, you're going to have a lot of ports, and additional food is nice. It'll allow you to upkeep specifically some more cheap armies as sort of garrison armies, which is something Troy struggles with in terms of its territory. I'll go over that later when we go over starting position. However, the one right after Fisherman's Tithe is missile range plus 15 on rank 4 or above missile infantry. This is quite useful. Remember how I talked about how the highest level of the Perseus Legacy gives you plus 4 recruitment rank? Well, right here, if you recruit those using the Perseus Legacy at the max level, which will take time, of course, you'll get them at 15 additional range, and Trojan archers are already very long ranged, or at least their elite ones are. Very useful to pick off enemy armies before they get into range, something Troy desperately needs to do. Once you've taken this tech, of course, you've got choices on where to go. Going for the extra legitimacy for battles is great. Just be aware that it's going to take you at minimum 11 turns to get there. So your starting wars, conquering your starting territory, will likely be over at that point. It doesn't mean it's useless because the various sea people and islanders tend to invade you. However, if you're going to go with the Perseus Legacy, I highly recommend going Charm and Offensive, getting additional diplomatic relations. Then you can, of course, gain relations with the Achaeans, the Thracians, the Phrygians, the Pelasgians. I don't know how you say that one. Anyway, basically the people in the Aegean court. This can prevent a lot of wars. In fact, when I did it in one of my campaigns, I never ended up having to fight a war with Mycenae. They tended to be quite loyal. In fact, later on in the game, I even allied them. So it helps you with your diplomacy. Further down here, if for some reason you want relations with the Egyptians, you can snag it. Same thing with the Hittites. Hittites is, I would say, more important than the Egyptians. Basically, Troy is the leader of the Western Hatti, kind of. It's a little unclear where the Hatti end and the Trojans, Aegeans begin. But you have ties, and the Hittites are right on your doorstep. Now, if you wanted to get more stone, which is not a bad thing because you're an alliance powerhouse, plus 15 stone income when you're allied to an Aegean faction, not particularly hard to do as Troy. Same thing with the Egyptians. If you're struggling with food, it's great. You just have to know who the Egyptians are, where they are, and ally them, which can take a little while to get there. On the other hand, allying the Hittites for bronze is very useful. You have problems with bronze early game and mid game, so having an additional bronze income if you get a bronze mine is quite nice. However, outside of snagging the range and maybe the initial diplomatic relations just to prevent any starting wars, or even the Aegeans, the next thing I would definitely go for is Valor of the Pious. Get that extra legitimacy from battles. This will, I won't say single-handedly, but probably it'll be like half the reason you won't lose your position of Supreme Ruler. And on the way, you get reduced construction time as well as plus 3 happiness in Troy area, which is great. Now, of course, if you want to do the prayer factions, you have a powerful god in Apollo for your range units. Lavish Feast could be worth snagging. Continuing on this direction, if you want, you can get god dedication slot. Never a bad thing. You're probably going to want to pick a god that solves either an influence problem, which as Troy you don't really care about, but it could be a problem for you, or happiness, or production. Those are what you're looking for. So basically, Troy, happiness, production. If for some reason you don't want to play the influence foreign presence game, grab an influence god. Over here, prayer duration plus 2, always useful. Keeps the bonuses of your shrines longer. And then finally, and this is why we went this way, you get additional 15 range for your missile units. Now, this is for experience ranked 9 missile infantry. They also get some armor. If you play Troy correctly, you're going to have a lot of elite range units. You want your melee units, particularly, they can die in battles, but you do not want to lose specifically some of your like Trojan noble archer units, in which case the one you start with and the others you'll gain over the course of the game should level up fairly quickly. Especially if you snag this tech on the way, Recruit the Observant, plus 30% XP from battles. Basically, you're going to want to snag at least these 3 just to fully solidify the power of your range units. Now, of course, at this point, I would normally jump over to the right side of the tree, but let's finish on the left while we're here. Refined bribery, ambush chance, and enemy siege holdout. Quite useful for a faction that sometimes struggles with defending its territory. Can be worth snagging, since considering it's only one out of your way, it's not bad. Up here, happiness after prayer. I wouldn't worry about this one. Same thing with divine gifts. Until you get a gold mine, don't worry about it. By the time you get a gold mine, you'll probably be in crisis or headed towards collapse, making this tech less useful. Now down here on the bottom, chariots, you really shouldn't be using chariots as Troy. You can, they're just not that good. However, farming the forest here is not bad. Wood income, there are some territories with wood near you, plus it never hurts to have wood. The AIs in particular like trading for wood, which is because wood income is usually heavily limited in the game. For example, the upgrade pass for like the wood ports is one of the worst upgrades I've ever seen in a Total War game. Tons of resources for 10 more. Not worth it. However, if we continue over here, construction costs, religious outpost, admin outpost, economic outpost, not a bad thing for Troy. I found I was losing a lot of my tiny little outposts on my borders due to invading armies. This helps you rebuild them cheaper. It's never a bad thing, cheaper buildings, especially if you're replacing them. Further on, build today, rest tomorrow, 10% cheaper construction costs for all buildings. I mean, if you've gone this far, why not just snag this tech? It's great. Finally, over here, riding mastery is chariots. Unless you're using chariots, totally skip this tech. Instead, get power of the people. Now, this is why we've gone down this tree. If you have a province with max idle workforce, which is not hard to pull off in the Trojan region, considering Troy starts at 4, its main building, settlement building, is at 4. It's very easy to get it to 5, as well as max out all your other settlements, in which case 20% more income from that region is very handy for a faction that, if you play diplomatically, does not expand a ton. Now, down here, obviously ambition choice. If you want to, you can do a little bit of what Mycenae kind of focuses on: small, powerful armies. Movement, ambush chance for armies 10 or fewer, as well as 10% cheaper food upkeep. Now, on the other hand, I want to give full support to researching these texts. Don't think I'm mocking them. Troy benefits immensely in my several campaigns as them for small garrison armies. Troy can't really support several armies early game, but it's easy to support like one stack and maybe like a 5 to 6 unit garrison army that just moves around your territory, reinforcing your settlements so they don't get taken by rogue armies, in which case the additional movement range, ambush is a little less useful, but the reduced food upkeep can be very handy for a garrison army, especially if you toss it in somewhere like a fort or something where it's already cheaper. Then it makes it dirt cheap. Now, we're going to go to the right side of the tree. Right side is military, and over the course of the game, as you start to improve and solidify your economy, you're going to be focusing more on the right side of the tree for fighting than you do on the left. But let's go right here. Shielded by the gods, melee defense, and missile defense against damage resistance versus missiles. Snag this one at some point. It's great. It's a solid bonus. Melee defense +5 is really handy for a faction that relies on basically a shield wall while your archers kill things, or a spear wall. Now over here, life of the soldier. If you can spare it in between researching all the economic, relationship, and range, snag this one fairly early once you start using range units. 75 XP per turn is not huge, but considering you get bonuses at 4 and again at 9, although to get to 9 you're really going to need battle XP, it's just nice to have early. It can make your garrison little army that much stronger. Over here, XP from battles, melee infantry. Honestly, you don't have to worry about it unless you really want stronger melee infantry. Your melee infantry for Troy is there to support your range units, fundamentally. However, we have this very odd tech here, Promise of Glory. If you sack or raise an outpost, +5 replenishment. Honestly, unless you're getting rid of military outposts or you're struggling to get resources, It's not that useful of a tech. However, it gets you to depending on the undependable, which as the world's stability collapses, you get more food from various buildings, and it lists some ports, buildings, basically most of your food income stuff, which is handy because Troy actually has some decent base level units as well as needs garrison armies. This helps you support those. So this is definitely where you would want to snag first. This one, this one, this one on the right side of the tree. Now, other things to think about. Down here on the bottom, for generals that are level 10 or more, aura size as morale can be very handy because you start off recruiting generals at least at 2. Morale is great. Just be aware if you have lethality on, generals die, I found, very quickly in battle. I lost Hector in several minor skirmishes in 2 of my campaigns. However, the next one is melee defense and morale. Not as useful for generals level 10 or more, mainly because you don't want your generals fighting with lethality because the odds are they'll get killed, but this helps them if they get flanked, basically. And then over here, bronze orientation. Less useful based off the world state, but can give you some bronze. Don't bother getting this until you get a bronze mine, which can take a while. Over here, influence for provinces with monuments. This is not one you want to take as Troy because you rely on having foreign presence. On the other hand, it does allow you to just throw down a monument and never have to build an influence building in your lands basically ever again. And you should be building monuments basically 1 per region because it gives you a good chunk of legitimacy. Influence after raising and sacking, I guess it's supposed to go with this one. It's not that great. Let's go over this line here. Speed, if your infantry is stronger, good. Workforce with temple, forget about it. It's not huge. Over here, +1 happiness from temples. If you're struggling for happiness with temples, it just means you're not building the right shrines in your lands. Don't think about getting happiness from temples. It's shrines are what give you happiness, not really temples. Further over here, ancillary chance up. It's okay. And then finally, bonuses for rank 9 infantry. Don't worry about it. You're a ranged faction. The most of this tree right here, these handful of techs, are fairly useless to Troy. They're not bad, and you want to research them eventually, but they're superfluous. You can take them later. I wouldn't even bother with anything in the bottom half early game. Further up here, however, faster recruitment, construction time for recruitment military buildings. Fairly good if you're expanding to allow you to build buildings to maintain your armies. Specifically, if you're losing your melee units, can be very handy to have a way to recruit them faster. Workforce costs, cheaper to build the military support and recruitments. Over here, raiding income. Honestly, in my opinion, if you have to raid your enemies to maintain your armies, you're probably not playing the game right, but this can help you. Siege holdout, decent if you can't take the settlement by siege, but I find AIs in particular tend to attack you if you can't take the settlement, and then you usually win a defensive battle and take the settlement anyway, so siege holdout, less useful than it would sound. Cheaper recruitment or construction for military outposts. Not a bad one considering the other bonuses to this similar buildings. It allows you to throw down forts, lookout towers, and whatever the other building is that gets you random units. I can't remember at the moment. It allows you to throw them down faster on occupied lands. Or rebuild them if you've been invaded, which happens a fair amount in this choice, so it's a little bit more useful than it would seem, but it's 4 deep in a tree that's less useful for Troy. On the end here, faster construction for most every outpost. Really handy for building up land late game. Finally, gold per level 5 building. If this was earlier in the tree, I would say to go for it, but it is so far deep in here, it's really not worth it till late game. But when you get this, you don't have to worry about gold because usually, at least in Troy, you're going to have several level 5 buildings. Jumping back to the middle here, XP from battles, native units. If your native units count as archers or even you're just infantry, fairly handy. Otherwise, a little less useful. Right here, XP from battles, all units. This is worth snagging. I've saved this section of the tree for last because it's where I would focus first on this side, which sounds a little strange. After you snag this, go down this tree. Grab the XP from battles, stacking it with, of course, the XP for range. Very powerful in general for leveling up your archers. Over here, cheaper recruitment when allied to the Aegeans. If you've gone Perseus, you're going to ally an Aegean faction. It's almost the name of the game, unless you're going for some crazy Total War strat, right? Cheaper recruitment, always good. Specifically, it targets more of your weaker units, which you'll be losing and replenishing more often, so it's actually quite handy. Here, another god dedication slot. Honestly, why not snag it at some point? God dedication slots get you bonuses. You can dedicate more gods, more generals to gods, more temples, more shrines. Can be very useful if you pick the right gods. Further on here, cheaper recruitment for tier 3 units, level 4 units, similar tech but bigger, and then tier 5 just as much as well. Considering you want to have several elite archers, this makes maintaining them much easier. And then finally, if you have a general at level 10, significantly cheaper to recruit units that are higher tiers. However, I will note that by that point of having a general at level 10 or higher, you probably recruited most units into that army, unless you're saving up for a major war. But considering Total War Pharaoh tends to rely on like 6 to 10 elite units in an army and then a lot of trash units, unless you're building an unstoppable army, which is fairly never worth it, unless you're Ramesses, but he's a bit of an exception. It's less useful. However, considering what you're looking at on the other trees, definitely go for this one. It's very easy to get elite units very quickly in Troy since you're already level 4. It's fairly easy to get to level 5 quickly. And that is the royal decrees. Okay, let's go over the starting situation for Troy. So the first thing in basically every Total War game these days is hit the home button so that the map gets realigned to fairly accurate. Here's where you are on the map. If we looked at where we started the view, let's see, how do I do that again? You were kind of like this, pointing off to the side. So if you hit the home button, it just will realign the map to a much better position, and that way you can actually see where things are compared to normal globes and maps today. So Troy starts kind of right at the edge of the Bosporus Strait here, Sea of Marmara area. Here's where modern-day Istanbul, previous Constantinople was, Byzantium. It's not there yet, but just to orient you on the map, you are across the sea from Greece, right kind of on this bit of land. It's a very decent starting location. The lack of naval combat, though, makes it less useful than it was historically. So obviously you have your starting battle here. You can win with your starting army, so don't worry about it. Just smash them. Once you've smashed them, you'll notice there's no one at war over there. In fact, you have to march over here to get it. Thankfully, Hector, the ever-loyal, dutiful son, is already in position to take that settlement. However, it may be worth recruiting some units for him. So if we go in right now, it's a valiant defeat, meaning we do have to recruit units before we take that. Now, if you play the battle yourself, not that I would necessarily recommend that for new players, Trojan Sworn Warriors combined with Troy's Chosen will allow you to win the battle. So you go over here, recruit some units. Now, in terms of what to recruit, Trojan Mob is really a trash unit. Get with Aswan warriors. You'll find the AIs use this a lot in their army. It's definitely a very good starter unit. It has extremely high lethality if it's on. If you don't have lethality on, it's a little bit less useful. But it will allow you to defeat several units of the same strength. Another reason you want to recruit units first is this guy here. He's going to attack. So doing what I did, march in and then retreat, terrible. In fact, you just want to make sure you stay out of his range and recruit units. Then give it another turn or two or even march Priam over and you can take this. So smash this army with Priam. Fight the battle yourself if you want the experience. Build up an army here. probably march Priam across country to help Hector, and then take this. Be aware they might take Zelia over here. There's not a lot you can do about that if they decide to go straight for it. They won't take it on turn 1 usually, but turn 2 or 3 they might. They tend to hide in Adressa. Adrestia, I guess. And this is your starting land. These 4 territories. Now, if you look at it, the resources in particular, you might notice a looming problem that I've mentioned several times for Troy. You have no bronze, you have no gold, and you have no wood. Thankfully, you have wood income buildings, which help. However, be aware that a decent amount of your bonuses over here are coming from some of your starting bonuses. Unlike Mycenae Agamemnon, who gets resources, you actually have several penalties here. You get cheaper recruitment and construction costs, that's nice, but you don't get all the income stuff unless you look in here and you actually see that you do. It's not as obvious, is my point. So some people were concerned about that in my other guide, that Troy doesn't get them. It does. So just be aware you're getting food, you're getting wood, you're getting workforce growth, as well as bronze, food, and wood again, as well as diplomatic relations with Hittites. So in 12 turns, 20 turns, and 30 turns, you're going to have to make up for basically 1,000 plus food income that you start with, meaning you can't actually support your starting armies. Just be aware of that. Basically, the income from your limited faction bundles will expire, and really you're only making about 371 food at the moment, meaning you need food buildings. Thankfully, you've got 3 food settlements, and you're going to want to build those up, but you don't have bronze, you don't have gold. Now, it is extremely tempting early game to go for something like this gold settlement down here and Volissos and attack these guys. It's doable. I don't want to, I'll tell you can't do it. However, these island provinces, some of the sea people out here, seem to be particularly aggressive to Troy, and getting more coastline when you have to defend it is difficult. However, if you look over here to the east, you'll notice more food, more stone. If you need stone, by all means go for it, but your starting stone mine is really good. You probably won't need more stone. That being said, one of the bonuses of the Legacy of Perseus is when you host the games, you get resources. This is very useful for you. You have to wait. We have to select various ancillaries here. This is a very easy way to get resources. If we host it now, we get stone. I've seen us getting food and other resources. So it can make up for some of the shortfalls of your starting territory, and for everything else, you trade stone or you trade food for. What you want to do, in my experience, after you've conquered the Trojan area, is probably set up a campaign to take these islands. Specifically, Myrna over here gets you a bronze settlement. Imbrasos up here might be the first territory you take just because of these guys. They tend to have 2 or more stacks because of the AI bonuses that just plain cheat. Which can make fighting them rather difficult. You're going to want an army either led by Hector or Paris, probably, or even by Priam if you want Hector to be your main general, which is not a bad idea because Priam will die eventually. Have one invade while the other focuses on defending the settlements and stuff. Be aware you'll probably lose some of these outposts out here, so it might not be worth investing that heavily in outposts there, but instead invest up on this coastline. Oddly enough, Sestos over here, I found, tends to ask for vassalage by like turn 20 or 30 if they're not destroyed. And if they do, that will usually drag you into a war with these island people. It's all part of the same... there's 3 islands out there. They're part of the same region. Sestos, on the other hand, is part of the regions up... game, work with me. The regions more up here. We can't zoom to that one, but we can zoom to these. This is actually a very good settlement to take, region to take over. You'll get the Thassos gold mine, which is good. You can get some food, which may be your vassal, which is fine. Troy benefits from having vassals. It's less administration upkeep. It can also get you wood, and between the wood and the food you have, you can easily trade for the bronze and the gold. But if you continued along this coast, you would find more bronze. I'll show you one of my mid-game save files later on, if I remember, and then I can show you expansion points. But suffice to say, conquer your starting area, probably make non-aggression pacts with these factions. You can later vassalize them. It's very easy to build an immense empire of vassals as Troy if you go diplomatic, and instead focus your efforts on defending your coastline and taking over some of these islands. It slows down your sea people invasion. In my experiences, I never got invaded from the north. That might just be because I had good relations with everybody. But I wasn't as... My main threats came from the west. In the long term, if you're not playing nice, Mycenae, of course, is to the west, as well as Achilles and all those other factions. Now, in terms of building, since I guess this counts as starting situation here, in terms of buildings, you want to get food. So you have several buildings that you can throw down. And you're going to want to build mostly food buildings early game. So Percote up here, throw down these two food buildings. Now, be aware, if you throw down both food buildings, right, you're going to fill up all the building slots here. Now, that's not the worst thing in the world, but since this is an coastal province, Percote, or however you say Percote, you're going to want to throw down a guard tower in it. Otherwise, people will just sail up the Bosporus into the Sea of Marmara and take it. So you're going to have to lose one of those slots. So thinking of which one you want, livestock pens gives you more food, grain farms, more workforce growth. In the long term, livestock pens are more beneficial because you'll max out workforce growth fairly easily in the Trojan Wood-Lusa province region. Now, Zelia is a slightly different story. It's inland. However, the AIs really like sacking it, in my opinion. Maybe it's because I armed all my other settlements, but I found a lot of people would land in southern Troy, march over, and then go for that settlement. So it can still be worth throwing down a garrison building. Plus, it adds happiness to the whole province. Not that Troy struggles with happiness at all. But it makes it slightly more defensive. If you want to, though, you could throw down the food building. On the other hand, you only have 2 food buildings, meaning your third could be a wood building. Plus 30 wood is not a bad thing. Just upgrading it only gives you 40, so only upgrade it if you've got nothing else to upgrade. It's a terrible upgrade for a building. It should be more like 60 or 70. Just its flat upgrade is fairly useless. Now, that kind of tells you the 2 minor settlements. Once you get a Drestia over here, whatever, this settlement, you've got already a stone mine, obviously upgrade that. There is a level 2 building that gets you more stone from the area, build that, and then probably stick a garrison there since it's the most easternmost province in your lands, just to make sure it doesn't get invaded by one of your neighbors. You definitely want to defend this settlement above your other 2 food settlements because stone is one of the best trading resources early game to get you bronze or gold. Now, let's look at Troy itself here. And I'm going to pull up the building browser for Troy. Troy has no particular super unique bonuses other than 1 landmark. It's the Citadel of Troy, plus 5 legitimacy, plus 1 victory points. However, plus 3 diplomatic relations with all factions. Troy can get a lot of diplomatic relations, as you saw. This is actually one of the few level 5 landmark buildings I'm a fan of building. Not for the victory point, but also because it gets you access to Troy's Chosen, which is a very powerful sword unit. It's very useful, plus the diplomatic relations. If you're playing diplomatic, it's great. Otherwise, the only reason you build it is for Troy's Chosen. And there's honestly better buildings for Troy. In Troy's starting settlement, you've got a port, you've got a basic infantry building, and you've got the Grand Temple of Apollo, which is quite nice. Happiness, upkeep, legitimacy, and favor. as well as productions of all resources. You can stack a lot of production bonuses in Troy, which makes it fairly useful. However, you have the ability to also build the Temple of Apollo rather than the Grand one. This looks nice on paper, upkeep, production. Sadly, you don't want to build this here. Troy is likely to be where you want to focus your military recruitment buildings as well as everything else, meaning you're going to need to, if you want access to all units, you're going to need at least 3 slots to get your recruitment buildings, then even 1 for the garrison if you want a garrison. And if you want to build this Trojan monument, which you do, and stick it in Troy, you've filled up all your building slots. So you can't really afford the temple. So assuming you're going to throw down the Trojan monument, how do you want to deal with the other stuff? Well, early game, you want to throw down a foreign relations office because it gets you a little bit of gold income, as well as more diplomatic relations. And more importantly for Troy, it lowers influence. The lowering of the influence will allow you to get more foreign presence, or at least maintain it. You might replace it later on once you solve your gold problems, when you can build at other places. But for right now, it's one of the best buildings for you to throw down once you can afford it. So I'm remembering you got to save a spot for the Trojan Monument. Destroying the Foreign Relations Office later and replacing it might be the way to go. You want to build the Trojan Monument for Sons of Troy for faction units, own armies in this province. It's quite useful. Now, in terms of the military recruitment buildings, assuming you don't want to spend a building slot on the city guard, which I did most of the time because the Troy chariots are not particularly useful, I would say. The noble bow chariots are okay, but your infantry archers outclass them. So you can skip this if you want to. In terms of your units, you've got your standard infantry housing buildings, which are your melee units, right? Walled barracks, infantry headquarters. Be aware that it does get you Sons of Troy for own armies faction units as well. However, for Troy, you want to focus on your target yard, by and large. You can get some archers and stuff from your native muster field. Asuan archers, they're not very good. You want the Trojan ones. The first level, however, is just slingers, which aren't bad. They've got a good range. They'll kill a lot of things early game, and you'll see your AIs use them. But it's the second level where you get renowned archers, 170 range. It's almost as good as your slingers. A little bit less, but if they recruit them at level 4 and you get the 15 range, then they match your archer slingers, and your archers are significantly better. The next level, you get better slingers. Honestly, at this point, you really should be using slingers. And then at the end here, Sons of Troy, Trojan nobles, really good archers, very powerful. They'll be like 250, 260 range easily. Which is just monstrous range, and they're very powerful. They do take a while to get to. Thankfully, Troy starts at level 4. Very easy to get to level 5 quickly. If you want to try and prevent the war from sliding into crisis, it's worth snagging level 5 here because it adds 70 civilization points, which can keep you out of the crisis state for a fair amount. It can keep you in prosperity longer, and of course you get benefits from prosperity versus the bonus the nomadic and sea people get. Plus, as the world gets worse, you have more trouble, right? So that is building and the starting situation. Control your starting area, focus Troy on military recruitment, probably try to conquer islands. Now let's look at the units. So I'm going to pull up the units over here for Troy. Trojan mob is fairly terrible. The only benefit here it has is shields. Probably don't really use it that much. It's going to be a little confusing here. Exemplary slingers. Honestly, by this point, your archers are probably better, but slingers are fairly useful if you can get a flank or to kill archers. They're actually fairly good at killing archers. Guards of Troy, level 5 unit, gold, administration costs, insanely good melee defense, very low lethality though, so they can get annihilated by axemen or clubmen, but against swordsmen or other spearmen or cav units or chariots, they do a very good job. Trojan sworn warriors, Very good two-handed club infantry, high lethality, which is quite useful. Fairly easy to recruit, quite useful in terms of their upkeep. It's a low bronze upkeep, decent amount of food. You can get it fairly early. It's going to make up a good chunk of your army. It's much better than your spearmen unless you're fighting archers. They shatter armor, which is really nice. Again, Troy chariots, not bad, but I really wouldn't use chariots as Troy unless you really want to have a chariot army. The upkeep in bronze early game is far too high. Trojan nobles, insanely good one. Good armor, good range, everything you would want in an archer unit. As I showed you where you recruit it, it's very high up there. Trojan noble chariots, if you want archer chariot, sure, but look at the difference in range. 155 versus 200 for basically the same tier unit and a higher upkeep. It does slightly more missile damage though. That's about it. And you can skirmish easier with them. You can skirmish decently well with the Trojan nobles though. They actually have a decent skirmish. They can shoot while moving, which is quite nice. Shielded Spear Warriors, it's a better version of the Trojan Mob. Still not entirely worth using everywhere. Good for holding the front line against slingers or archers, because they're shielded. Not particularly good against clubmen and axemen. They will die so quickly you'll wonder, why did you even bring them? Better than the Trojan Mob, though, if you had your choice. Does cost bronze early game, and early game you want to avoid bronze costs. Trojan Slingers, only used to fill out your armies early game. The AI loves armies of slingers. The only way to counter a slinger army really is with your own slinger army. I did not have a great success in using shielded units to handle slingers. I don't know why. Maybe it's because of the range. Eventually they wear down the armor and they do get kills. They're very dangerous if you flank with them. Trojan Swordsman, honestly, I would love to like this unit, but it just kind of fails at its role. You're better off really with either the Spearmen to hold the line, or you're better off with Club Warriors to kill things. It kind of is jack of all trade, master of none. I guess it's good versus other swordsmen. Renowned Archers, this is going to be your first major archer unit. Fairly good. Little bit of a bronze upkeep, so don't go crazy on them. 4 or 5 or 6 in an army early game is more than enough. And Trojan Swordsman, it's a better version of the, well, it's basically the same unit, same name, just higher level, slow movement, better armor, better fighting stuff. It's still kind of jack of all trade, master of none. I've seen high level swords units lose to low level club and axe units, which make it difficult in that sense. Now, the other thing we have to look at is the Aswan natives here. I forgot to do this in my CNA video, I realized. These are going to be your native population to the area, and you can recruit them. Swordsmen, honestly, I think it's almost slightly better than the Trojan one. The Son of Troy ability you can get would make your Trojan units better in the long run, but it's not that bad. Archer chariots, your Trojan archer chariots are better, so just ignore this unit completely. Armored archers, if you look at the range, they're about on par with what you have. Honestly, just get Trojan nobles. They're a better unit overall. Although these I do want to point out, these cost bronze, whereas the Trojan nobles cost gold. So think of that as you go forward. Coastal Club Fighters, it's a terrible unit. Don't use it, really, unless you need to fill out bodies in your army. They're pretty bad, low lethality. They're going to die to most everything. Eastern Spearmen, your Trojan Spearmen are better. Don't use this unit, basically. Heavy Shock Spears, two-handed Spear Infantry fills an interesting place in the game with your charges. If they charge from the flank, they will annihilate units. If they don't charge from the flank, they tend to get picked off by range units. It's level 4. I preferred it over some of the Trojan level 4 units just because this thing can kill things. Heavy Spearmen, your Trojan ones basically outclass this one. So I really wouldn't worry about this that much. It fills its role of Western Hattie, frontline, hold it, kill nothing unit. Archers, 150, they're outranged and outclassed by your Trojan archers, but they can be recruited a little bit earlier. I really wouldn't use them that much. Chariots, again, Trojan chariots are better. You don't have particularly good ones in your region. Slingers, they're expendable, and that's basically the use of them. They're a little easier to use than the Trojan slingers because they don't cause morale difference, so they can be quite useful to send forward and sacrifice. They'll do decent damage, especially if they flank or have time to shoot. S1 warriors, this is the one we were really looking for. Early game, this should make up a good chunk of your army. The AI will field a lot of these early game, and you'd be surprised how hard those armies can hit, mainly because they're good versus missiles, and they have high lethality. They're expendable, so just be aware that too many expendable units can cause problems as they route, but I would almost put them at a tier 2, maybe almost tier 3 unit early game. Very powerful. Use quite a lot of these. Use less swordsmen, less spearmen early game. Only weakness is they can get shot at, but they're surprisingly good versus missiles. And then renowned Trojan slingers. For some reason this is here, even though it should be under the Trojan ones. We've already talked about Trojan units. And that's basically it. The Trojan archers are the way to go. The native warriors early game are good. However, I do want to point out that if you go Perseus and you can recruit allied units, very powerful. You can kind of fill out your roster, pick up stronger chariots from Hatti, better swordsmen, better spearmen for somewhere like Egypt, Mesopotamia. You could even get some horsemen if you can make some alliances out there. It's a little harder the further away they are, but if you expand by slowly coast jumping, picking off 1 or 2 settlements or regions, very easily to build a global empire that you don't own everything, but you get units from everywhere. It's kind of fun. Also, I will point out the special recruitment. This will be our little introduction to the court here. Here's your Aegean court. Here's Agamemnon. He's your big threat. Be aware that over time you can get your treaty up. You have to last through the past war, broken treaties, and faction aversion. But it's not the hardest thing in the world to become friends with them. Interestingly enough, you actually own this position with Hector at the start, giving you 2 positions, which is quite useful. It gives you elite units in recruitment, flanking, lower cost, as well as legitimacy. It can make Hector's army very good at flanking. There's also the Law Getus position here, which you will have to deal with fairly early. You can grant it to people. Beware who you grant it to can have outrage as gratitude. The top one is the one that expects it. They're strong, little bit of grumbling, more grumbling, but you can get relations with people. Plus, you can try and keep people out of the court. Particularly useful keeping Agamemnon out of things if he's causing trouble. As Priam, the Supreme Wanax, you have more elite units, harder to do intrigues against you. I personally found that most people did the intrigues for Hector, just because you're so protected up here. You don't want to lose Supreme Ruler, but just keep an eye on that one. Hector is your big threat. I've actually had him assassinated once or twice by the AI. It was particularly annoying. Over here is your standard visit sacred lands to gain resources. It's not the worst thing for Troy if for some reason you get the opportunity to take this, because running around in your sacred lands can get you a lot of resources. Since most of your lands are going to be sacred, it's a decent bonus for you. Over here, Oracle. This is a way to get gold from temples. Honestly, I'd forget about it. Don't worry about it. And obviously, if you can kick out Agamemnon, you can choose which army wages are lowered, which can be quite handy. You can't allocate this, but actually you can at the first turn, interestingly. So you can set that up. You can also just throw people out of court, which is definitely worth doing if Agamemnon starts a civil war. Kick him out of the court, it'll lower his legitimacy by at least 7. Or other factions too, but he's your big threat, right? So because you have those court positions, you have access to the special recruitment. Now, in the special recruitment, you have some very powerful units. Be aware of the cost. These Trojan Prince units are amazing. If you look at the difference between a renowned archer and them, they are amazingly superior. It can be very well worth it to recruit one early game. Just be aware of the gold and bronze upkeep. It will skyrocket. Now, elsewhere in this special recruitment tree, you have other ones here. These Gorilla Stalkers, very powerful javelin. Flanking with them will absolutely destroy units. Plus, they're basically invisible when moving. The Wenex Retinue, two-handed axes. It's basically only access to axe units. This will annihilate anything with a shield. It's amazing. It's also fairly good against the two-handed club warriors that a lot of factions field early game. Champions of Troy can be useful. It's got an underdog thing where it'll hold out longer, kind of if it's fighting multiple enemies. Sadly, a lot of the two-handed club units early game counter this, the Swan Vanguard, as well as the Paragon Swordsman. Meaning early game, 1, 2, 3, Trojan Princes first, very powerful. In fact, if you wanted to take this settlement on the first turn, which I don't necessarily recommend because this guy tends to retake it, you could special recruitment some of these units and then do it. Just be aware you only have 200 gold, so you'd have to trade for more resources. In terms of court management, the first thing you want to try and do is get closer to 150 legitimacy. That's about what you'll need for the first 50, 60, 70 turns to prevent a civil war. You can grow fairly quickly, especially if you get the royal decree that gets you legitimacy. Be aware that Mycenae can get over 100 fairly fast if they fight a lot of battles. It's a little harder for you. Do remember, of course, court plotting as well as battle legitimacy declines over time in dynasties. So you actually have a fairly good chance, if you can prevent the civil war, to keep it going. Also, do not neglect the fact that you can trade for legitimacy support from factions in the same royal tradition as you. Since a lot of factions like you, this is a good way of getting legitimacy to counter a rising other faction. Also be aware that you get 18 here because legitimacy, because you're following Apollo, which is the patron deity of the Aegean pantheon, because you're Troy. It can change if the supreme ruler changes. You also have these regalia, and it's worth noting what they are, because Athena's Aegeus is relations with the Aegean factions, as well as increase acceptance of diplomatic agreements. It's available to the starting Wenex. Definitely make sure one of your first things you do is throw it on Priam. It's extremely useful for him. You could theoretically throw it elsewhere, but he's not the faction leader at this point, so Hector can't. But later on, if you're fighting, the replenishment, and Hector, once Priam dies and he's your main fighter, replenishment, cause fear, grant encourage, can be very useful for an offensive Aegean faction. This one, if you control Mycenae, is useful, so expect to see this on Agamemnon or his successors. Okay, a couple more tips, and then I'll show you a later game save file. So, as I said, you want to get to 150. Probably one of the first things you want to do is get court presence so you can fill more of the court. Be aware that the War Games power is extremely powerful on Troy, especially if you get the 2 ranks gain on use on archers. It can get you to those high-level archer range bonuses earlier. Competency is fairly useful. If you're playing diplomatic, you probably won't be fighting as much as some other factions, meaning that your generals will fall behind in experience. Competency will counteract that. I wouldn't worry about remote colonization early game. I really wouldn't worry about forced annexation. The court could be neglected till you level up to 230 if you want to go for that. Instead, get war games and competency. Besides, once tier 2 you get 3 out of 5 positions, court presence is even better. The goal, obviously, in the long run, is to control all the positions in the court, at which case no one can challenge you, basically for a civil war. But you have to be huge and very powerful. You probably own all of Greece and Anatolia before you hit that point. Just be aware, keeping an eye on Mycenae. Knossos over here doesn't tend to succeed much, but they can grow a lot. Be aware of that. Let's see. There was a couple other things, minor tips. Ah, yes, your deities here. Apollo is a great deity for fighting with range. Don't forget to pray, lay of sight, devoted general to it, plus ammunition, as well as range lethality, which can stack up to 6, allows your archers to annihilate people. Just make sure you have a shrine in the region where you're recruiting units. Thankfully, you start with one in Troy. If you use Troy as your main center, it's very useful. However, in terms of other deities, you do know one Hittite one. This is a pretty good deity here, Aridia. So you may want to consider this. It adds happiness, as well as food, as well as cheaper recruitment cost. Devoting the general, cheaper upkeep, very good for a garrison army. Plus, you can worship it fairly early on when you unlock a second god slot. If you want to stay pure Aegean, go with the Greek ones. You have other options. There's Aphrodite. She's not particularly that good. Yes, it's cheaper to recruit armies with food, but food is the easiest resource. It does apply replenishment as well as morale. Honestly, though, she's quite terrible. You're better off focusing on Zeus, which is the Mycenae main focus god, to get the happiness. It also improves missile damage, but not for archers. Only Apollo does archers, so don't be fooled by this missile damage. Happiness, construction cost, very useful. Stick one in a province, you won't have to worry about revolts, especially if you level it up to +7. Poseidon, on the other hand, little less useful for you than, say, Mycenae, because you don't care about influence as much. On the other hand, though, it does give you food and wood from provinces, so if you're struggling with food and wood, it can be quite useful, as well as deep sea immunity and the ability to rocket across the Aegean. And then we have Ares. I'm kind of surprised they suggest Ares. You figure they might have other deities, but we have Ares. Melee lethality. If you want to use swordsmen, as well as axemen. You don't have a lot of axemen, but if you want to use swordsmen, you want to worship Ares so that you have the melee lethality. Thankfully, you can just hold a hecatomb to him at some point and gain this on all your people. Fairly useful. The devoted general is actually quite useful. Better recruitment as well as reduced morale. Can help with some of the raiding armies if you stick it on a garrison army. Sadly, there are better deities for a garrison army. And when I say a garrison army, I'm talking, an army maybe a little bit larger than Hector, whose main job is to sit in a settlement here so that this garrison, which I think you can get up to 14 or 15, you move that in there, it's now 20 plus, means invading armies can't really take that settlement. That's what I mean by a garrison army, by the way. Oh, to finish summarizing about the gods, the Hittite one, wrong one. The Hittite god is my preference to worship, but the other one obviously would be Zeus. Don't forget to dedicate a general. If you're going to fight with Priam. If you're going to fight with Hector, don't forget you also have Aeneas, who's not part of your family tree, making him a great expendable general. I used him a lot once I realized how often Hector dies in battle. Dedicating whoever you're using to Apollo so that your archers get stronger. You want archers. I don't know if I can harp this enough. Archers are really powerful as Troy. Let's jump forward in time to one of my campaigns so you can see the wider map and where I've expanded. Okay, here we are. We're about 37 turns in the game. I figured this would be a good point to kind of show you the status of the world. So what we've got here is Troy holding some of the coastline. Whoops, let me turn this off. Oh, I just lost the vassal, by the way. That's annoying. I didn't even realize that was this turn. As you will see here, we mainly focused on Troy. Troy is basically fully built up. I found I needed the food. I'm going to replace it later once I balance out my armies. Hector died in this campaign, by the way. Here's my garrison army of Priam. Lots of Assuan warriors, as well as some slingers. I used Paris as my main general rather than Aeneas. I think Aeneas died, actually. As you can see here, this was the campaign where I used spearmen. It was not worth it in the slightest. This, I think, was my first campaign. You'll see I still was using slingers and warriors. Later on, I shifted to more archers. It made the game significantly easier. But as you can see, my economy, even 37 turns in, is struggling. It is extremely hard to get bronze. I never managed to conquer Marina over here. Instead, I jumped up here to Thassos, got the gold, which is very important too. Ismaros, that was picked up on the way. Obviously, I have to burn it all down and rebuild it the correct way. I killed off the faction invaded me. These guys got killed. That's why Paris is coming back. If we look over here, come on, game. These guys over here are vassals of me. I've got some allies over here. In fact, I allied some of these big guys over here, or defensively allied at least. But I was able to vassalize a lot of these minor settlements over here, which was quite nice because I got resources, as well as just cemented my border here. There's a lot of fighting going on up here. Nothing over here. A lot in the islands. Nothing to the south here, meaning my territories I picked up here in a war held. There's no way for me to maintain these or further invest in taking the coast because of all the fighting going on up here. I think that's where I was in this campaign. It was going fairly well. We were expanding, conquering things. As you'll see, we're up to 199 legitimacy. 109 of that is from battles. The Bochians, 149. Mycenae in this campaign, oddly enough, never got going. Competency helped, as well as filling court positions. The downside of the court positions, I think as I said earlier, is there's a lot of plots against me. Almost no one plots against anyone else. It's all versus me. That's because I have so much legitimacy. Anyway, this was a successful campaign in the long run, but it was a bit of a slog. The mistakes made, not enough archers, not getting a bronze settlement. I had to keep trading stone for bronze. In the end, it was just a pain of a campaign. It didn't get much easier for a long time till I managed to subdue these islands, at which point there was no contest. I vassalized most of the Aegeans, crushed Mycenae, and ended up controlling both Greece and Anatolia, as well as paying the absurdly high administration tier costs. Troy actually has an advantage here. Making vassals does not increase your administration cost. The downside is they will periodically betray and revolt against you, and then you have to go kill them. Slight peculiarity of this campaign. If we looked at diplomacy, if I recall, the vassalize, I could vassalize people over here like Biblios, just due to treaties, bonuses, royal decrees. I do have a confederation penalty. But it was actually quite easy for me to vassalize some of these minor Hattian and Syrian areas. Honestly, the problem was then defending them. But it was quite exciting to do so. As you can see here, I've got 3 vassals already. These guys, people way over here, and people up here. Diplomacy works for Troy, just to kind of give you that idea here. In terms of foreign presence, because I know people want to see how effective that was, I had 2. I could have focused on a little more. I was still learning the game. But the penalty, even that of 4 morale, constantly hitting these guys in the long run, was fairly useful. In terms of special recruitments, Perseus. I did Perseus. I'm 37 turns in it. I basically maxed it out. So it's not hard to get mass unity for the Aegeans. And I can recruit all these various allied units, some of which are better than our starting units, heavy Anatolian chariots in particular, if you like chariots, as well as access to axemen and stuff, which can be quite useful. Holding the games, always very fun. As you can see here, we're getting tons of stone, tons of food that I then trade away for bronze. So, as you can see here, allies give you more. Defensive alliances give you a decent amount as well. Very easy to level up. 37 turns, very powerful. I've got the global recruitment, all the allied ones, and the special recruitment. Very powerful, especially if I click this. I'll use it here. Access to the Mad Mares of Thrace, a very useful unit. Oddly enough, and it's worth mentioning this unit because I think it's a glitch. It just costs basically gold and upkeep. Nothing else, just gold. making it a very useful unit if you can get your hands on it. It's a tier 5 unit that only costs 30 gold. I mean, I think it's kind of broken. Same thing with the Renowned Axeman, so the units you get from that can be very useful. I just wanted to demonstrate that before the end. So that will be it for this guide. Hopefully it helps you play Troy better. I found it one of the harder ones. Definitely requires more focus on diplomacy, which is not everyone's cup of tea, as well as archers and knowing how to use flanking and range units more properly. Quite a pain early game. Gets easier once you subdue the islands and you can start invading people versus being invaded yourself. Anyway, that will be it for me. If you enjoyed this, like, comment, subscribe, all those great things. If you've got a better strategy for expansion or your own experience with the units, by all means, throw it below in the comments. People love reading those, as do I. And I'll see you guys all in another guide or Let's Play. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.